Today on Weekend Welder, it's our introduction to metal finishing. We'll show you how to clean up your projects and then using products like these, how to apply a variety of finishes to them. Hi, I'm Ben McCall, the Weekend Welder. Welcome to our episode on metal finishing. In our last two episodes, we made this boot scraper, plant stand, and wine rack, but we didn't get around to doing any finishing on them. Today we're going to show you how to clean those up and put a couple different finishes on it. Let's look at some different ways to clean scale and rust from metal. There are several trade associations that work with the metalworking industry in the United States. They report that they get more questions about finishing issues than any other single item. There are lots of tips and techniques to learn about metal finishing, but the first rule is if it's not clean, you won't get a good finish. At this point in time, we have a limited number of tools that are available to us for metal finishing. We'll get to some more advanced techniques later on, but for the types of projects we're doing right now, these things will pretty well work. One of the first ones we have is a metal brush with a good handle on it. We've cleaned up a plate like this before when we were welding it together, but now we need to clean the entire surface to make it ready to finish. As you can see, we've cleaned up half of it pretty well. We can come back and do the rest of it. Another method of cleaning is to use something like navel jelly to clean it up. What we've done here is spray the navel jelly on, use a rag to spread it evenly over the metal surface, and left it sit for 10 or 15 minutes. This will dissolve most of the rust and some of the scale off of the piece, then we can come back and wipe it down. Once it's cleaned off, we'll use the metal brush to clean it up some more. Some other options that we've got are steel wool, sandpaper, emery cloth, which is particularly good for getting in hard to reach places and working around rounds, and a couple of other different size and configuration metal brushes. Unfortunately, the number one ingredient in cleaning up metal is elbow grease. Our very first project was our boot scraper. At the time that we welded them up, I took this one and went ahead and put some primer and paint on it, and it looks pretty good. I'm a little bit worried that when you scrape your boot along the top of it, though, the paint's going to get worn off of it, so I think I'm going to try and put a clear finish on this one. In order to do that, we're going to have to clean it up quite a bit. It's been several weeks since we made this, so we've got a little bit of rust on there to get off, but it's really not too bad. The first thing that we're going to do on just about any project is use the chipping hammer to get off the slag. Since this piece has been handled quite a bit, there's not terribly much slag on it, but all you want to do is strike it with the pointed end of your hammer and you'll get most of it off. Once the slag has been removed, what we're going to want to do is use our 3 files, round, flat, and square, to clean up the weld beads a little bit. We've got several places where we've got excessive metal and a few places where it's not terribly even, so we're going to take away the excess and smooth out the rest of it. Okay, our welds are cleaned up. Next, what we want to do is get off the rust and get off a bunch of this scale off of the flat piece. We're going to use our steel wool and our sandpaper to do that. What we want to end up with is a nice smooth finish like we've got here on this leg. We want to get rid of some of these tooling marks on the upper part of the leg and shine up this piece right here. Well, I've been rubbing on this boot scraper long enough to think that maybe a clear finish wasn't the best idea, but I've got it done. We'll put a clear finish on it. It's going to look great. What turned out to do the best job for me on this particular project was my emery cloth and then my small wire brush for the tight spaces. All we're going to do now is put some linseed oil on it and then leave it to dry. Your linseed oil can be used straight out of the can. All you want to do is take a clean rag, soak the oil in it, and then rub it all over your project. We've got a good coating on that. We'll let it dry for a little while. We'll come back and put another coat on it later. A couple of other products that you can use for the same type of finish is paste wax that comes in a can and is already soft, or canning wax that comes in blocks that you can rub on. Another choice with your canning wax is to go ahead and melt it and apply it with a brush or a cloth, but I like just to rub it on in the stick form. Any one of these three products will put a clear finish on your project and protect it from the weather. On our plant stand, we're going to use a painted finish, so we're not going to have to get it quite as clean as we did the boot scraper, but other than that, it's pretty much the same type of operation. Because we had so many more welds, there's quite a bit more slag on this, so I'm going to chip for a while. Well, I got quite a bit of loose material off with a chipping hammer. Another tool that I like to use sometimes is a small pair of cutting pliers. It's good for getting little bits of splatter off that you didn't get with the chipping hammer, and it's also pretty good for reaching into corners. While I'm working on this top edge, I want to go ahead and show you a couple of other problems that we've got on this particular item. Our crossbars are mounted on top of the support bar, and they really kind of come out here and just end. What we want to do to those is round off the edges to give a little bit more of a pleasing look. We'll use a variety of files to dress these up a little bit. All right, we've got the ends of our cross pieces filed off. We've got one other issue that we need to take care of on this project. Our pieces of angle that we use for our legs come up and end square, and inside of that, the round pieces that we use for the frame don't come up quite flush. We're going to have to file those off to give us a smooth transition. I'm going to have to take away quite a bit of metal, so I'm going to go ahead and set the project down on the ground so I can control it with my legs and get more force on the file. It's going to take me a while to get this done, and I've still got a little bit of work to do on our inside joints. Once that's all done, we'll be able to start painting it. I've finished cleaning up our plant stand, and to save some time, I went ahead and put a coat of primer on it. For our finish coat on this particular project, we're going to use flat black paint. Because this will have plants sitting on it and that they will be the center of attention, we really want a background kind of finish on this particular project rather than something that's going to stand out on its own. In most cases, it's best to start your spraying with the project turned upside down. That way the finish coats that you spray later will look the best. One other thing that I like to do when we use a larger foot like this is you'll have a tendency for paint to build up right here around this edge. Sometimes that paint won't dry completely and you run the risk of marking either your floor or whatever finish it's got on it. What I normally do on the bottom of my feet is use a clear finish like we used on some of our candle holders. As I start to paint the black with it turned upside down like this, I'll start a little bit down on the legs so that I don't get any more paint up here on the top. Then once I turn it over, I can spray this area and end up with a good finish. Okay, we've got a good solid first coat on our plant stand. Once this dries up, we'll be able to flip it over, paint it again, and then with just a little bit of touch-up, we should be through. As you can see, I've got this setting on a piece of plywood to help protect the concrete from the excess paint. As you can also see, there are other times when I've painted without doing this, and it leaves a mark and it's kind of unsightly. There's any number of ways you can protect your floor, whether it's with a drop cloth, rolls of butcher paper, or one of my favorites, a large sheet of cardboard. Well, we've got our wine rack all cleaned up and ready to finish. Since this is going to be an inside piece, it'll actually be kind of on display. There's a couple more steps that we want to go through before we start spraying it. First, we're going to take a clean rag and wipe down all the surfaces of the wine rack very well to get any loose particles off. We'll do this at every stage in the finishing process. Next, we're going to be spraying it up on top of our table, so we want to clean it off to make sure that the stray particles on it don't get blown up into the finish. Just like with our other pieces, we're probably not going to be able to get coatings on all the different angles and little insets without getting too much on, so it's going to take us several coats to get what we want. Again, since this is a finished interior piece, we're going to be a little bit more picky about sanding it out and cleaning it up before we put the finished coat on. I think that's all we're going to be able to get right now. Just a few minutes for that to dry, and we'll be able to coat it again, and it may actually take a third coat before we're happy with what we've got. We've got a good coat of primer all the way around our wine rack. Now we're going to do a little bit of sanding. We've got a little bit of area right here where some fuzz off of my glove got into the primer, and there's some up here where a little bit of trash got into it. We've also got a little bit of welding splatter that we need to take off in a few places. We're going to do that with our sandpaper. We're using 220 grit sandpaper. We want to be careful that we don't actually leave grooves in the primer from our sandpaper. We've sanded all the way around our wine rack. I've kind of gone around it a couple different times, looking at it from different directions to make sure that I got all the points. Then cleaned it off with our clean rag again, and I'm going to set it upside down on my table to apply the first coat of paint. That way any drips or sags that you get in the early stages won't affect the way it looks finished from the upper side. We'll get everything sprayed that we can from this angle, and then we'll flip it over for the last coat. Well, that gives us a good solid coat of paint all over our wine rack.
Well, that pretty well covers the basics of cleaning up metal and basic metal finishing. There are a lot of other metal finishing options, and we'll continue to show you those as we make more and more projects. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more, subscribe to our channel. 8FD Designs works out of 32,000 square feet of space on 3.5 acres in Decatur, Texas. If you're ever in the area and you want to learn more about our events, our store, our classroom, or want a shop tour, come and see us in Decatur, Texas.